In this video, we're going to be looking into protecting our Lambda from uh, like malicious attacks. So let's say if you have a Lambda and you want to protect it from some kind of intruder trying to, so you know that some of the your endpoints cannot be hit by like certain amount of more than certain amount of times. So you know that if that threshold is going to increase, that is basically someone trying to mess up things. So we want to, this strategy is called throttling. So we want to have like some limits on our Lambda, so that we can block the IP addresses and we can block the requests, because if we don't do that, it's gonna incur us a lot of cost, and that's not a good thing. There are multiple ways of doing that. I'm gonna be going through some of them, which is kind of like you can, they all have some pros and cons, but the most famous one, if you just want to stick to what the AWS provides you, is going to be what they call API gateway. So let's assume that I'm gonna write it down here. So let's assume that you have the Lambda inside the API gateway, right? You are using an API gateway. Basically, API gateway is a powerful service that allows you to create, publish, maintain, monitor, and secure the APIs. So, uh, so one of the key features of API gateway is API gateway is request throttling. So they made it for you, say, so they don't allow, just with a bare Lambda without the API gateway, you cannot have throttling enabled. So they want you to, and there are there are extra charges for the API gateway too. So so you need to configure the rate limits at the API gateway. So the rate limit needs to be set up, and basically you can effectively control the traffic flowing into your Lambda function. Just remember that once you enable it, let's say if you had a bare Lambda and then you had an RDS database, and RDS database was publicly accessible with the username and a password, and you were connecting. So let's just do that. You had that, right? And we had a database. Somehow you were just connecting with it directly, right? If you start putting the API gateway, things are not gonna work the way it used to be. So it may ask you to put things in the VPC. It may ask you to have some kind of proxy setup on the database, uh, so that the API gateway can talk to it. So stuff like that. So things are gonna there are there is a pattern you have to follow when you set it up. So to implement it, you would go to the API. Give me 1 second. AWS console login, log back in. I'm just logging to my AWS account to show you. Okay, so oops. So you would go to the API gateway. That's how it looks like. You're gonna select the API resource you want to configure. If you don't have one, you're gonna have you're gonna have to create a new one, right? You have to create the HTTP API. You have WebSocket API, REST API. REST API is private. So you have to build one, then you have to like once you in the process of building it, and you're gonna have a stages section, and then you're gonna write the desired state, like is it gonna be like basically the environment variable, like is it gonna be development or production, stuff like that. And then you can set up the desired throttling settings, and which includes basically the request rate and the burst limit. Okay, moving on to the new one, the next one, it's gonna be, it's called, you can also do it using CloudFront. Basically, it's a CloudFront plus Lambda at Edge. So CloudFront is a content delivery network, a CDN, which basically accelerates the delivery of the web content. The way they do it is like they make sure that where your Lambda is, and they try to put the things, the data, whatever you need to access, close to where you're going to be accessing it from. So when coupled with this CloudFront, which is a CDN, when it is combined with this Lambda Edge, you can implement like advanced request processing and any kind of filtering you want. Uh, so you can, if you want to block the request from using this, the combination of the CloudFront and the Lambda and the Edge, you need the so your Lambda function need to inspect incoming requests, track the number of requests each IP address is sending, and then enforce the rate limiting policies. So you would deploy the Lambda function to the CloudFront edge locations using Lambda Edge. That's how you would do that. So it's not like you have a running Lambda. So basically, your Lambda needs to do that. Track the number of requests from each IP address, and then deploying that Lambda into the CloudFront edges. And then you can configure the CloudFront behavior basically to trigger that the Lambda function for incoming requests, and you can put the restrictions over there. This kind of setup, like this one, is gonna block the request from specific IP addresses. Uh, like that can exceed if you have some predefined thresholds. Whenever it exceeds that, you can block that IP address. Another one, if you don't want to pay, if you don't want to get into this API gateway or CloudFront, you can do is like a custom IP IP based limiting. So you can actually have a custom one in order to do, like implement that. You're gonna be keeping track of the number of requests from each IP address, just like that we did a little bit over here, using like you would use a data store. You have to you're gonna end up using what do you call, you're gonna end up using some kind of data store. It could be Redis, it could be DynamoDB. So you're going to be using that, storing that information. And again, the reason it needs to be Redis or this, because it's gonna like it should be quick. It should be in like a in memory or a cache kind of thing, so that it is fast, it is accessible, and like we're not making a connection to a remote DB. So so when the request arrives, you're gonna be checking the request count from the IP address, uh, like against a predefined threshold. And if the request count exceeds the threshold, uh, you basically block the request or return an error response. So like this kind of approach is gonna give you like a fine grain control over request handling, and it would allow you to do the same thing, like limit the the request from any of the IP addresses. You can do another way. AWS has this feature called AWS Web Application Firewall, also known as WAP. So this is a web application firewall that would help you protect your web application from common web exploits. Like uh, it would let you create rules to filter and monitor HTTP and HTTPS requests, and it can also block requests from specific IP addresses. And in order to do that, like you would create the WAF rules to match requests based on the IP addresses, uh, request rate, and other like whatever criteria you have, you can put in there. And then you have to associate the WAF rules to the API gateway. So you would still be using the API gateway and associate those rules, the WAP rules, to your API gateway instead of basically creating the rules in the API gateway or using the in the Lambda Edge. You would actually use the web application firewall and those just point your gateways to use those WAP rules. Okay, the last one I want, actually there is one which is about like the access control list. So the access control list is like, let's say if your Lambda is deployed within a VPC, you can uh, like use the network ACLs, like the access control list, to control inbound and outbound traffic to the subnet level. Because remember, when we go to our Lambda, set it up, and you assign what subnets it should belong to. So you can actually, on the subnet levels, you can actually say that, okay, I want to have inbound and outbound traffic controls. So if you are trying to block the traffic, right, you can configure the inbound and the outbound traffic rules in the ACL to deny traffic from targeted IP addresses. So again, the way you would uh, so that's gonna help. But one thing to keep in mind, like there needs to be a way that you're gonna feed that information uh, to the ACL rules, because your Lambda is going to figure out which IP addresses to block. But like kind of for me, it looks like a little bit more manual process, because you somehow have to figure out which IP addresses you want to block and then set up the ACL rules for that one. And lastly, you can actually use any third party like party solutions. So basically, you can explore like something outside of the AWS resources. You can use their third-party APIs to basically pass your request through them in order to see if someone is trying to exploit the application. That's how you would block some repetitive, not even repetitive, these requests are kind of like trying to exploit your system. So you can block against these kind of attacks. Thanks all.